A toddler was found crying in a field during a thunderstorm. Then a Hell's Angel saw the rope the sky over Route 9 had been bruising itself purple for the last hour, and Marcus Doyle rode straight into it like he had somewhere better to be than out of the rain. He didn't. Not really. That was the truth of it. Nobody waited on Marcus at the end of these roads. Hadn't for 11 years. The wind pushed hard against his shoulders, and thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and mean, like something big clearing its throat. He kept the throttle steady. 60 miles an hour on a cracked county road wasn't smart in weather like this, but smart hadn't been the point of tonight's ride. He'd needed to move, needed the engine noise to drown out his own head for a while. It hadn't worked. Emily's face kept coming back to him anyway, the way it always did this time of year. 7 years old forever now. She'd had his crooked smile and her mother's soft brown eyes, and she used to ride on the gas tank in front of him in their driveway, pretend steering with her little hands while he laughed, and kept his palms hovering an inch over hers, never touching, just in case. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story he hadn't been there the day the truck ran the light. 11 years, and he still heard the phone ring sometimes in his sleep, still saw the hospital hallway, that terrible fluorescent light, the chaplain's face already arranged into the shape of bad news before he even opened his mouth. Marcus's jaw tightened under his salt and pepper beard. His hands, big and scarred from decades of engine work and worse, gripped the handlebars a little harder now, knuckles pale beneath old ink. You couldn't outrun that kind of guilt. He'd tried whiskey, tried silence, tried the brotherhood of the club, which had given him a family of sorts, men who didn't ask questions, who understood a certain kind of broken without needing it explained. None of it filled the hole. He'd stopped expecting it to. The first fat drops of rain hit his visor just as the sky finally gave up holding itself together. It came down all at once, not gentle, not a warning drizzle, but a wall of water like the clouds had been waiting for exactly this moment to let go. Lightning cracked somewhere close, a jagged white seam splitting the black sky, and for a second the whole world turned silver and stark. Fields and fence posts and the wet ribbon of road all lit up like a photograph. Marcus swore under his breath and eased off the throttle. The bike's tires hissed against the slick asphalt. He needed to find somewhere to wait this out, a gas station, a barn, anything with a roof. His leather jacket was already soaked through at the shoulders, the rain finding every gap in his collar and running cold down his neck. Another flash of lightning tore across the sky, longer this time, and in that stretched-out second of white light, something in the field off to his right caught his eye. He almost missed it. Almost told himself it was nothing, a scarecrow, a bag of trash caught on a fence, some trick of the storm and his own tired eyes. But then it moved. Marcus's stomach dropped. He eased the bike onto the gravel shoulder, boots skidding slightly on the wet stones, heart suddenly pounding harder than the thunder overhead. He squinted through the rain, streaking his visor, waiting for the next flash of lightning, like a man waiting for a verdict. It came, and this time he saw it clear as anything, and it froze the blood in his chest. Small, low to the ground, thrashing weakly in the mud, arms flailing. And over the roar of the storm, faint but unmistakable, he heard it. A cry. High and broken and terrified, the kind of sound that didn't belong out here in an empty field in the middle of a thunderstorm. The kind of sound no man who'd ever held a child could hear, and keep riding past. Marcus killed the engine. He swung off the bike so fast his boot caught the edge of the seat, and he stumbled onto the gravel, nearly going down on one knee. He didn't care. He was already moving, already climbing over the low fence at the edge of the field, his hands slipping on the wet wood. The mud grabbed his boots the second he hit the field, sucking at every step like it didn't want him to reach her. He pushed through it anyway, his legs pumping hard, rain hammering his face so thick he could barely keep his eyes open. Thunder cracked again, closer now, shaking the air around him, but he barely registered it. All he could hear was that crying, that thin, ragged, terrified crying, rising and falling with the wind. "I'm coming," he shouted, though he doubted the wind carried his voice anywhere close to her. "Hold on, I'm coming." Lightning tore the sky open again, and this time he saw her clear. A little girl, no older than 2, maybe younger. She was on her back in the mud, soaked through, her thin arms flailing at the rain like she was trying to fight it off. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her scalp. Her mouth was open in a scream that the storm kept swallowing before it could go anywhere. And around her middle, cutting into the soft fabric of her shirt, was a rope. Thick and rough, the kind used for tying down tarps or hauling lumber. It ran taut from her body to a metal stake driven deep into the ground a few feet away. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something old and raw that he thought had scarred over years ago. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He covered the last stretch of ground in a stumbling run, mud splattering up his jeans, rain running in sheets down his face and beard. He dropped to his knees beside her, heedless of the freezing muck soaking through his jeans instantly. Hey, sweetheart. I got you." His voice came out rough, cracked with something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. He kept it low, as steady as he could make it over the pounding rain. "I got you now. You're okay." She flinched at his voice, her small body going rigid, eyes wide and wild with fear, but she didn't stop crying. If anything, she cried harder, her whole face crumpling, tiny hands reaching up blindly. Marcus's hands, the same hands that had wrenched stubborn engine bolts loose and thrown punches in bar fights he wasn't proud of, moved with a gentleness that surprised even him. He reached into his boot and pulled free the pocket knife he'd carried for 20 years, the one with the worn bone handle. His fingers were shaking, he realized. Not from the cold. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Easy." He worked the blade under the rope where it pressed against her side, careful, so careful, angling it away from her skin. The rope was old but tightly wound, and it took 2 hard saws before it finally gave way and fell open into the mud. The second she was free, Marcus dropped the knife and scooped her up into his arms in one motion, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. She was shaking so hard he could feel it in his own bones, her small body racked with cold and sobs, and up close he could see her lips had gone faintly blue. "I got you," he said again, quieter now, almost a whisper. "I got you, baby girl. You're safe." He didn't think. He just moved. His hands went to the front of his leather vest, unzipping it enough to tuck her inside against his chest, wrapping the heavy leather around her small trembling frame like a shield against the storm. She was so cold. She pressed her face into his shirt like she was trying to disappear into him. her cries softening slightly, exhausted, into hiccuping whimpers. Marcus held her tight against his chest with one arm, rain still pouring down around them both, and turned back toward the road where his bike sat, waiting in the dark, engine silent, headlight cutting a single beam through the storm. The farmhouse porch light glowed yellow through the rain, a small square of warmth in all that gray. Marcus half ran, half stumbled toward it, the little girl clutched tight against his chest, his vest wrapped around her like a second skin. His boots pounded up the porch steps, and he didn't bother knocking soft. He hit that door with the flat of his fist, hard, 3 times. "Help. I need help out here." For a second, nothing. Then a porch light flicked on above him, and he heard the shuffle of feet. A lock turning slow. The door cracked open to reveal an old man, maybe 70, suspenders over a undershirt, squinting out into the storm like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. What in the world? "I found a kid," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the word kid. "Out in your field. She was tied down out there. Please. I need to call somebody. She's freezing." The old man's eyes went wide, and behind him a woman's voice called out, "Frank? Who is it?" She appeared a moment later, gray hair in a braid down her back, wrapping a robe tight around herself. The second she saw the bundle in Marcus's arms, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my Lord. Frank, let him in. Let him in." They didn't hesitate after that. Frank stepped back and pulled the door wide, and Marcus ducked inside, dripping mud and rainwater onto their clean floor, not that anybody cared about that right now. The house was warm, smelled like coffee and old wood, and the woman was already moving, pulling blankets from a hall closet before Marcus had even found a place to stand. Here, put her down, we'll get her warm," the woman said, spreading a thick quilt over the couch cushions. Marcus knelt and laid the little girl down as gentle as he could, though she whimpered and grabbed a fistful of his shirt when he tried to pull back, refusing to let go. Her lips were still tinged blue, her small body shivering in violent little waves. "It's okay," he told her, voice low and rough. "I'm right here. Not going anywhere." He let her keep her grip on his shirt while the woman wrapped blanket after blanket around her, rubbing her arms and legs to bring the warmth back. Frank was already on the phone in the kitchen, and Marcus could hear him talking fast, giving the address, saying words like toddler and hypothermia and rope. His voice tight with urgency. "You're going to be okay," Marcus murmured to her, smoothing back her wet hair from her forehead with a hand that still trembled slightly. "You hear me? Okay now." She stared up at him with enormous dark eyes, red-rimmed and swollen from crying, and something in her gaze seemed to settle just slightly at the sound of his voice. Her cries had dropped to soft hiccups, her small chest rising and falling fast, but steadier than before. The woman, whose name Marcus would later learn was Dottie, brought a cup of warm water and coaxed a few sips past the girl's lips, murmuring soft nonsense the way grandmothers do. Frank came back into the room, phone still in hand. "Ambulance is coming," he said. 10 minutes, maybe less. Sheriff's on his way too." Marcus nodded, throat too tight to answer right away. He kept his hand resting light on the girl's shoulder, feeling her heartbeat flutter fast beneath his palm, feeling something in his own chest crack wide open. Old grief rising up out of some buried place he'd tried for years to keep sealed shut. The minutes passed like hours. Dottie kept rubbing warmth into the girl's small hands. Frank stood by the window, watching for headlights. And Marcus stayed kneeling on that living room floor, mud drying stiff on his jeans, unable to make himself stand up, unable to look away from her face. When the ambulance lights finally swept red and white across the walls, the girl's grip on his shirt tightened again, and she let out a thin cry of protest as the paramedics came through the door. "Sir, we need you to step back," one of them said gently, moving in with a blanket of their own. Marcus stood, slow and stiff, but as they lifted her onto the stretcher, she reached one small hand out toward him, fingers grasping at empty air, and something in him refused to let that be the end of it. "I'm following you," he said. "Wherever you're taking her, I'm right behind you." The paramedic hesitated, glanced at his cut, his patch, his mud-soaked boots, but something in Marcus's face must have told her arguing wasn't worth the time. "Suit yourself," she said. "Storm's bad out there." "Don't care," Marcus said, already moving toward the door. "I'm not leaving her." The waiting room smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. Marcus sat in a plastic chair too small for his frame, elbows on his knees, water still dripping off the ends of his hair onto the tile floor. His cut hung heavy and soaked over the back of the chair beside him, the leather dark with rain. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He couldn't. A young nurse approached with a clipboard, her sneakers squeaking soft against the floor. She looked barely older than 25, ponytail slipping loose from its band, eyes kind but tired the way people get after a long shift. "Sir, I know this isn't a good time, but I need to ask you a few questions. For our report." Marcus looked up at her, and whatever she saw on his face made her pause a second before sitting down across from him. "Go ahead," he said. "Can you tell me how you found her?" "The little girl?" He rubbed a hand down his face, feeling the stubble rough against his palm. "I was riding home. Storm came up fast, worse than the forecast said. I saw something in the field off the county road, past mile marker 11. Lightning caught it just right. I almost missed her." "And she was alone?" "She was tied down," Marcus said, and his voice came out flatter than he meant it to, like saying it too loud might make it more real than he could stand. "Rope around her middle. Staked into the ground. She couldn't have gotten more than a few feet in any direction." The nurse's pen stopped moving. She looked up at him. "Tied down, like on purpose? Somebody put her there," Marcus said. "That's not an accident. That's not a kid who wandered off." His jaw worked side to side. "I cut her loose with my knife. Carried her to the nearest house." The nurse wrote something down, her hand a little unsteady now. "Do you know if anyone reported her missing? A name? Anything? No ID on her, obviously. She's what, 2? Maybe not even that." Marcus leaned back, and the plastic chair creaked under him. She wasn't saying much, just crying, shivering something awful. Before the nurse could ask another question, the double doors at the end of the hallway swung open, and Sheriff Dale Hutchins walked through, rain jacket still dripping, hat in one hand. He was a solid man in his 50s, silver at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen enough small-town trouble to stop being surprised by much of anything. He spotted Marcus and crossed the room in a few long strides. "Preacher," he said, using the old nickname without thinking twice. "Heard you pulled a kid out of Miller's back field." "Dale," Marcus stood, and the two men shook hands, Hutchins's grip firm despite the tired lines around his eyes. "The nurse can finish up," Hutchins said, glancing at her. "I need his statement anyway." "Official, He pulled a chair around and sat facing Marcus, notepad already out. "Walk me through it. Everything you saw." Marcus told it again, slower this time, careful with every detail. The storm, the flash of lightning, the stake driven into the mud, the rope thick and rough, tied in a strange pattern he hadn't paid much mind to at the time, too busy trying to get the knife through it. "I kept it," Marcus said suddenly, reaching into the inside pocket of his soaked jacket. "The rope. Cut it close to the stake, didn't think, just shoved it in my pocket. Figured somebody might need it for evidence." He pulled out the coiled length of rope, dark and heavy with mud and rainwater, and held it out. Hutchins took it careful, turning it over in his hands, studying the knot still holding its shape near one end. "You got a photo of the stake? Where it was in the ground?" "Snapped one on my phone before I left. Wasn't thinking straight, but something told me to." Marcus pulled out his phone, the screen cracked in one corner, but still working, and swiped through until he found the photo, holding it out toward Hutchins. Hutchins leaned in close, squinting at the image, then at the rope in his hands, turning it again slowly. His brow furrowed, and Marcus watched the sheriff's face change, the color draining out of it inch by inch. "Dale? What is it?" Hutchins didn't answer right away. He kept staring at the knot, running his thumb along its twisted pattern like he was trying to convince himself he was wrong. "This knot," Hutchins said finally, voice low and tight. "I've seen this before. Only one place I know of ties rope like this." "Where?" Hutchins looked up at him, and his eyes were hard now, serious in a way Marcus hadn't seen from him in years. "The Larson compound. Out past Route 9, edge of the county line." He shook his head slow. "Preacher, this wasn't some accident. Somebody meant for that little girl to be found." Marcus sat back down slow, the plastic chair creaking beneath his weight. "Tell me about this compound," he said. "Everything you got." Hutchins rubbed the back of his neck, still holding the muddy rope like it might bite him. He glanced at the nurse, who took the hint and stepped away toward the desk, giving them room. "Not much to tell, and that's part of the problem," Hutchins said. "Larson compound's been out there going on 15 years now. Started with some family who bought up a chunk of land past Route 9, way back in the woods where the county road turns to gravel and then just quits altogether. Over the years, more folks moved in, built their own houses, grow their own food, don't want nothing to do with the rest of us. 15 years and nobody's done anything about it? It ain't that simple, preacher." Hutchins set the rope down on the table between them like it was something fragile. "Land's private property. They pay their taxes, far as we can tell, through some lawyer in the next county over. Kids out there, if they got kids, they claim to homeschool, which is legal, far as the law's concerned, long as somebody files the paperwork." "And does anybody check on that paperwork?" Hutchins's jaw tightened. "Child welfare's tried. Twice, that I know of, going back years. Both times, the compound folks were polite as church deacons, showed the workers around a couple houses, said everything was fine. No cause for concern, no evidence of neglect. Case got closed both times." He shook his head. "Thing is, that land is huge. Workers only ever see what they're shown. There could be a dozen more houses back in those trees nobody from the county's ever laid eyes on." Marcus felt something cold settle low in his gut, colder than the rain still clinging to his skin. So basically, whatever's happening out there, they've gotten good at hiding it. That's about the size of it. Hutchins leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping lower. We get calls sometimes. Anonymous, somebody driving by at night says they saw fences, dogs, cameras maybe. But nobody official's been past the front gate in better than 8 years. They got no phone numbers we know of, no names we can put to faces other than the one fella who deals with the lawyer, and that knot. Marcus nodded toward the rope. You're telling me you've seen it before, tied like that. Same knot showed up on a fence post out that way, years back, when a deputy got sent to check on a noise complaint. Never forgot it. Wasn't no standard knot, nothing a farmer or a hunter would use. Somebody taught these people to tie rope a particular way, and they all tie it the same. Hutchins met Marcus's eyes. Which means somebody from in there put that rope on that child. Somebody who wanted her found, or wanted to send a message, or both. Marcus sat with that a long moment, the weight of it pressing down on his chest like a stone. He thought about the little girl's face in the lightning, the way she'd screamed like the whole world was ending. Small fists balled up and shaking. We need to figure out who she belongs to, Marcus said. We will. Gonna take some digging. Hutchins stood, tucking the rope carefully into an evidence bag he pulled from his jacket pocket. I'll get this processed. Start pulling old missing persons files. See if anything matches up with kids that age reported gone the last few years. Might take some time. Before Marcus could answer, a woman in a gray blazer came around the corner, a laminated badge clipped to her pocket, a folder tucked under one arm. She had the brisk, tired walk of someone who'd worked in a hospital a very long time. Excuse me, are you the gentleman who brought in the little girl from Miller's Field? Marcus stood. That's me. She's stable. Sleeping now, poor thing. Mild hypothermia, some scrapes, but nothing life-threatening. The woman glanced at her folder. The problem is, we've got no identification on her. No name, no birth certificate, nothing linking her to any family we can find. That means Child Protective Services will need to open a case first thing tomorrow morning. Marcus felt the words leave his mouth before he'd fully decided to say them. I want to help. Whatever you need. I'm not walking away from this. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He tried, lying on top of the covers in a motel room 10 minutes from the hospital, boots still on, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like nothing and everything at once. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The little girl. The rope biting into her belly. The way her scream had cut through the thunder like it was the only sound left in the world. By 6 a.m, he gave up on rest altogether. He splashed cold water on his face in the cracked motel bathroom sink, pulled his vest back on over his shirt, and rode back to the hospital with the sun barely cracking over the tree line, gray and weak, like it hadn't decided yet if the storm was really over. He found Hutchins in a small conference room down the hall from the pediatric ward, a room with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and a table covered in manila folders stacked 2 and 3 high. Hutchins looked like he hadn't slept either. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and there was a foam coffee cup in front of him that had gone cold enough to grow a skin on top. You look worse than me, Marcus said, dropping into the chair across from him. Compliment, coming from you. Hutchins didn't look up. He was flipping through a folder, running a finger down a typed page, then setting it aside and pulling another. Been at this since 4. Couldn't sleep either. Figured I might as well make myself useful. Find anything? Found a lot of nothing, which is its own kind of something. Hutchins leaned back, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. I pulled every missing persons case in this county going back 20 years. Cross-referenced against anybody with ties to the Larson land, far as we can trace it. Names on old property records, names on that lawyer's paperwork, names neighbors mentioned over the years when they bothered to call it in. And there's a pattern, if you squint at it right. Hutchins tapped the stack of folders. Every few years, somebody from this county just stops existing. Not dead, not that we know of, just gone. No forwarding address, no goodbye, nothing, most of them young. Women, mostly, though not all. Small towns lose people quiet like that sometimes. Folks assume they just moved off, started over somewhere else. Nobody thinks twice. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Until you got a 2-year-old tied to a stake in a field. Until then, yeah, Hutchins pulled the top folder off the nearest stack and opened it flat on the table between them. This one's got me thinking. Woman named Callie. 24 when she went missing, 6 years back. Reported by her mother, a school teacher over in Hollis County. No sign of foul play at the time, no evidence of anything, really, just a woman who packed a bag one day and never came home. Mother said she'd been talking about some group out this way. Folks who lived simple, didn't answer to nobody. Deputies back then didn't think much of it. Case went cold inside a year. He slid the folder an inch closer to Marcus, tapping the corner of a photograph clipped to the inside cover. If this girl's the right age, if she matches up close enough, this Callie could be our missing mother. Would explain the compound tie. Would explain the knot, too, if she learned that same rope work growing up around here before she ever went out that way. Marcus leaned forward without much urgency, more out of habit than real hope. The way a man looks at one more dead end because he's already looked at 50 that night. He glanced down at the photograph and froze. The face staring up at him from the grainy old photo was younger, thinner, hollowed out by whatever 6 years of hard living had done to her. But there was no mistaking it. Marcus had seen that same nose, that same set of the eyes, 100 times before, in a face that had aged gentle, where this one had aged hard. He knew that face because he'd loved the woman who'd raised her. Ruth, he said, so quiet it barely made it past his own teeth. That's Ruth Bennett's girl. Hutchins was still talking, saying something about pulling the old case file in full, but Marcus barely heard him. He was already standing, already moving toward the door, his boots heavy on the tile floor. 25 years. It had been 25 years since he'd said Ruth Bennett's name out loud to another living soul. Marcus. Hutchins called after him. Where you going? To see an old friend. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked out through the hospital doors into the gray morning light, the storm's leftover puddles still sitting in the parking lot like little black mirrors, and he got on his bike and rode. The address was easy enough to find. Hutchins had written it on a sticky note without being asked, like he already knew Marcus would need it, like he'd seen something pass over Marcus's face that told him more than words could. Hollis County wasn't far. 20 minutes on the highway, then a turn onto a county road lined with fences and fields gone gold with early autumn. Marcus rode slow. Not because the roads were bad, though they were still slick from the night before. He rode slow because some part of him wasn't ready to arrive. 25 years. He tried to do the math in his head, tried to remember the last time he'd seen her. It had been at his own daughter's funeral, actually, though he hadn't let himself think about that in a long, long time. Ruth had come. She hadn't said much. She'd just stood beside him at the graveside, her hand resting light on his arm, and something in that touch had told him she understood grief in a way most people didn't. They'd talked for a while after. Promised to call. Never did. Life had pulled them both in different directions. The way it does. Quiet, and without any drama, until one day too much time had passed to make it easy anymore. He wondered if she'd even recognize him. He was heavier now, grayer, his face lined from years of sun and road and things he didn't like to remember. He wondered if she'd slam the door in his face, or worse, look at him with polite confusion, like a man selling something nobody wanted. By the time he pulled up outside a small white house with a covered porch and a row of marigolds planted along the walk, his hands were shaking on the handlebars. He cut the engine and sat there a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling metal, trying to figure out what he was even going to say. "Ruth, it's Marcus. Marcus Doyle. You remember me? Ruth, I found somebody. I think she's yours." None of it sounded right. None of it sounded like enough. He walked up the path anyway. The porch steps creaked under his boots, the same tired creak that old porches always had, like they were groaning under the weight of everything that had ever walked across them. He raised his hand to knock and hesitated, just for a second, staring at his own knuckles, thick and scarred, wondering if they belonged on this door at all. Then he knocked. Footsteps came from inside, slow ones. A moment later the door opened, and there she was. Ruth Bennett. Older, yes, her hair had gone from brown to silver, pulled back in a soft bun, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, lines that spoke of years of worry and waiting. But her eyes were the same, still that same warm brown, still holding that same quiet kindness he remembered from a lifetime ago. She blinked at him, confused at first, studying his face like she was trying to place a memory that had gone soft around the edges. "Marcus?" she said, her voice unsure. "Marcus Doyle, is that you?" He didn't answer her question. He couldn't find the words for hello, or for sorry, or for it's been too long. All the things he'd rehearsed on the ride over fell away, and what came out instead was the only thing that mattered. "Ruth," he said. "Your granddaughter. She's alive. I found her." Ruth's face crumpled. Her knees seemed to give, and she reached for him without thinking, and Marcus caught her, folding his arms around her as she collapsed against his chest, sobbing, her whole body shaking with 25 years of grief and hope crashing together all at once. Ruth held onto him for a long moment before she pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her own tears but not able to stop them. "Come in," she said. "Please come in and tell me everything." She led him through the small house, past a hallway lined with photographs. Marcus saw them as he walked. A little girl with pigtails, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera. The same girl older, maybe 16, standing awkward and proud in a graduation gown that was clearly a size too big. Callie. He'd never met her. Not really. But he knew her face now. Knew it the way you know a stranger's face after staring at a missing poster too long. The living room was small and neat, the furniture worn soft with age. A quilt lay folded over the back of the couch. On the mantel sat more pictures, and Ruth reached for one of them before she even sat down. A photograph of a baby, no more than a year old, wrapped in a yellow blanket, her tiny fist raised near her mouth like she was about to laugh. "This is her," Ruth said, her voice trembling. "This is Callie. The last picture I have of her before she left." She sank into the armchair across from him, still holding the photo against her chest like it might slip away if she let go. "Tell me. Tell me everything." So Marcus did. He told her about the storm, about riding home in weather no sane man would ride in, about the flash of lightning that showed him something in the field that stopped his heart cold. He told her about the rope, tied tight around the little girl's waist, staked into the mud like she was an animal somebody meant to keep from wandering too far. He watched Ruth's face as he spoke, watched the color drain out of it, watched her knuckles go white around the photograph. "She was crying," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Screaming, really, soaked through. I cut her loose and got her under my vest and got her to a farmhouse close by. She's at the hospital now. She's safe, Ruth. She's warm and she's fed, and there's people looking after her." Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth. For a moment she couldn't speak at all. "The rope," Marcus went on, "gentler now. Hutchins says it's tied in a way that matches a compound out past Hollis Ridge. Folks who keep to themselves. Been out there for years, avoiding the law, avoiding everybody." Ruth's eyes came up sharp at that. Something moved behind them. Something that looked almost like recognition, though she said nothing yet. "That knot," Marcus said carefully, watching her. "You know something about it?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She looked down at the photograph in her hands, at the baby who would be a grown woman now, a mother herself, and her thumb moved slowly over the edge of it like she was trying to smooth away 25 years in a single touch. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe. I don't know yet." She looked up at him, and there was something fierce in her face now, something that hadn't been there a moment before. "I want to see her. I want to see my granddaughter, Marcus. Now please. That's why I came," he said. "Let's go." She was up before he finished the sentence, moving toward the door with a speed that surprised him, snatching a cardigan off the hook by the entryway and pulling it over her shoulders with shaking hands. Marcus followed her out to his bike, and for a moment they both stood there looking at it, and he realized with a small ache that there was no way a woman her age was climbing onto the back of a Harley. "I'll drive," she said, already heading for the old sedan parked in the gravel drive. "You can navigate. Or just sit there. I don't much care which." He almost smiled at that. He climbed into the passenger seat, folding his big frame into the small car, feeling strange and out of place in a way he hadn't felt in years. Ruth backed out of the driveway with the photograph still clutched in one hand. Resting on her lap now as she drove, her eyes fixed hard on the road ahead. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fields rolled by outside, gold and quiet in the morning light, and Marcus watched Ruth's profile. The same profile he remembered from a graveside 25 years ago, older now, but still her. "I never stopped thinking about you," Ruth said suddenly, not looking at him. "After the funeral. I thought about calling. Every year, around her birthday, I thought about it." "I thought about it too," Marcus said quietly. "Never did it either." Ruth's hands tightened on the wheel. "Well," she said, "we're doing something now." The hospital smelled like every hospital Marcus had ever been in. Bleach and coffee and something underneath that he could never name. something that made his stomach tighten no matter how many years passed. He led Ruth down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past a row of chairs bolted to the wall, and he felt her hand find his arm and grip it tight. "Third door on the left," he said. They moved her to a room upstairs once they got her checked out. "She's doing good, Ruth. Better than good." Ruth didn't answer. Her breath had gone short and quick, and her eyes were fixed straight ahead like she was afraid if she looked anywhere else, the moment would slip away from her. A young nurse stood outside the door, going over a chart, and she looked up when they approached. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her grandmother," Ruth said. The words came out cracked, like she hadn't used them in a long time and wasn't sure they still fit. The nurse's face softened. "We've been calling her Hope," she said. Didn't have a name to put on the chart, and one of the girls on the night shift started it and it just sort of stuck. "She's a sweet thing. Cried herself out for a while, but she's calmed down a lot since this morning." Ruth nodded, though Marcus wasn't sure she'd heard a word of it. She was already moving past the nurse, already pushing the door open with a hand that trembled so hard the door swung wider than she meant it to. The room was small and bright, sunlight coming in through the blinds in thin gold stripes. In the middle of it, propped up in a hospital crib with rails too big for her, sat the little girl. She'd been cleaned up since Marcus had seen her last. Someone had washed the mud from her hair and dressed her in a little yellow gown that swallowed her small frame. She had a bandage on one arm where they'd drawn blood, and her cheeks were still red and raw from crying, but her eyes were open now, alert, watching the door with the wary stillness of a child who had learned too early not to trust what walked through it. Ruth stopped in the doorway like she'd hit a wall. "Oh," she said, so soft it was barely a sound at all. "Oh my." Marcus watched her face as she looked at the child, and he saw the exact moment it happened. Saw recognition move through her like a current. The little girl's eyes were dark, almost black, round and serious, and they were Callie's eyes. Marcus had seen the photograph on the mantel, the graduation picture, the same eyes staring out from under a cap that didn't fit right. There was no mistaking it. Blood didn't lie, and neither did a face built from the same bones twice over. "That's my Callie's eyes," Ruth whispered. "That's her eyes exactly." The little girl watched Ruth with the same caution she'd have given anyone, but something in her didn't look away either. She sat very still, her small fists curled around the crib rail, watching this stranger who had gone white and trembling in the doorway. Ruth crossed the room slowly, like she was afraid sudden movement might scare something so fragile into breaking. She reached the crib and stood there a long moment, just looking, her hands hovering in the air like she didn't trust them not to shake apart entirely. "Can I hold her?" she asked, not to Marcus, not to the nurse, but to the room, to God, to whoever might be listening and could give her permission. The nurse, standing just behind them now, nodded and stepped forward to help lift the child from the crib. Ruth's arms came up automatically, the way arms do when they remember, even after 25 years, exactly how to hold a baby. The moment hope settled against her, Ruth made a sound Marcus had never heard a person make before. Somewhere between a sob and a laugh, torn straight up out of her chest. She pressed her face down into the child's hair, and her shoulders shook, and she rocked her gently side to side the way mothers do without ever being taught. "Hello," Ruth whispered into her hair. "Hello, sweet girl." "Hello." Tears ran freely down her face now, falling onto the yellow gown, and she didn't try to stop them or wipe them away. She just held on, rocking, weeping, laughing, all of it tangled together into something too big for one feeling to hold alone. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched them, his throat tight, his jaw working. He didn't move closer. This wasn't his moment to step into. But standing there, watching Ruth hold that baby like she was the whole world returned to her at once, he felt something harden and settle inside his chest. They still had to find Callie. The clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel road outside town, a long metal building that used to be a machine shop before the club bought it and made it their own. Marcus pulled in just as the sun was dipping low, throwing orange light across a dozen bikes lined up out front like sleeping animals. He cut his engine and sat there a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like motor oil and cigarette smoke, same as it always had. A few of the brothers were scattered around a pool table in the back, and Big Sam looked up first, his heavy face breaking into a grin that faded fast when he saw the look on Marcus's face. "Preacher," Sam said, setting down his cue. "You look like hell went and found you." Something like that. Marcus pulled off his helmet and set it on the bar. "Need everybody in here. All of you. This is important." Word moved fast in a clubhouse. Within 10 minutes, 8 men had gathered around the long table near the back, boots up on chairs, beers forgotten in front of them. Marcus stood at the head of the table and told them everything. The storm, the field, the rope staked into the mud, the little girl he'd carried against his chest, soaked to the bone, screaming loud enough to wake the dead. Nobody said a word while he talked. When he got to the part about the compound, about the knot Hutchins recognized, about Ruth and the daughter she'd lost, the room went dead quiet. The kind of quiet that meant they were all listening hard. "So here's where we stand," Marcus said. "There's a woman out there, Callie, and she might still be inside that compound. We don't know what we're dealing with. Could be a bunch of scared folks who just want to be left alone. Could be something worse. Either way, we go in loud, we go in stupid, somebody could get hurt. Maybe her. Maybe the baby's mother never makes it out at all." Tiny, who'd earned his name by being the biggest man in 3 counties, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "What do you need from us, preacher?" "Quiet work," Marcus said. "I need eyes and ears near that compound, but nobody knocking on the front gate asking questions. Gas stations, diners, feed stores. Anybody who's lived out that way a long time is gonna know something about the people up on that ridge. Old-timers talk if you let them talk long enough. I need names. I need to know how many people are in there, whether they come to town for supplies, who trusts who. And I need it done soft. Nobody spooked. Nobody tipped off." Doc, the club's unofficial medic and the closest thing they had to a strategist, crossed his arms. "You thinking they got somebody watching the roads?" "Wouldn't surprise me," Marcus said. "Man like that, hold up that long, he's careful. We go in with patches blazing, we lose whatever chance we got of getting her out safe. This has to be slow. Has to be smart." There was a pause, brothers looking at each other around the table, some old unspoken agreement passing between them the way it always did when the club decided something mattered. "We're in," Sam said, and around the table, heads nodded, one after another, until every man had said it out loud or shown it plain on his face. Marcus felt something loosen behind his ribs, some tight fist unclenching. "Split into pairs," he said. "Doc, take Tiny. Work the diners along Route 9. Sam, you and Wheeler hit the gas stations closer to the Ridge Road. Cooper, you still got that cousin does hunting leases out that way?" "Yeah," Cooper said. "Man knows every inch of that county. Talk to him. Quiet. See what he's heard about the folks on that land." Marcus looked around the table one more time, at these men who'd ride into fire for each other, and now for a woman and a baby most of them had never met. Nobody does anything but ask questions and listen. We are not confronting anybody. We find out what we can, we bring it back, and we figure out the next step together. Are we clear? A round of nods, murmured agreement, the scrape of chairs as men stood and started pulling on jackets. Marcus grabbed his helmet off the bar. "I'm heading back to Ruth. She needs to know we've got people working on this. I'll check in with everybody tomorrow." He walked back out into the cooling evening air, the sound of engines starting up behind him, his brothers scattering out into the dark to do the only thing that might bring Callie home safe. The days that followed had a rhythm to them, slow and careful, like walking on ice you weren't sure would hold. Marcus started each morning at Ruth's kitchen table, drinking coffee that was always too strong, watching Hope play with a set of wooden spoons Ruth had given her to bang on the floor. Ruth would ask the same question every day, quiet, like she was afraid of the answer. "Anything yet?" And every day Marcus would shake his head and tell her they were close, even when he wasn't sure that was true. Doc and Tiny worked the diners along Route 9, sliding into booths and ordering pie they didn't want, letting old men talk. Old men always wanted to talk, especially to a fellow willing to listen. Doc had a way of nodding along, asking small questions that didn't sound like questions at all, just curiosity from a stranger passing through. "Folks up on that ridge," one old-timer told him, stirring his coffee slow, "they don't want nothing to do with the rest of us." Been that way going on 10 years now. Used to be you'd see 1 or 2 of them come into town for supplies. Not so much anymore. "They got a name?" Doc asked, careful, easy. The old man's face changed a little, something wary passing behind his eyes. "Some folks call the one in charge the shepherd. Don't know his real name. Don't know that anybody does. Not anymore." "He dangerous?" The old man just shrugged, the kind of shrug that said more than words could. "Man keeps his people close. Real close. Don't let them wander much. My grandson used to hunt that ridge before they put up the fencing. Says he seen the shepherd once, standing at the tree line, just watching. Didn't say a word. Just watched till my grandson packed up and left." Sam and Wheeler had similar luck at the gas stations closer to the Ridge Road, though luck wasn't quite the word for it. Mostly it was small pieces, fragments that didn't fit together yet. A woman at a feed store said she'd heard the group grew their own food, kept mostly to themselves, didn't believe in doctors or schools or anything that came from town. A trucker at a truck stop said he'd delivered supplies out that way years back and got turned around at a locked gate by 2 men who didn't say much beyond telling him where to leave the boxes. Cooper's cousin, the one with the hunting leases, gave them the most useful thing yet. He'd walked that ridge for years before the compound fenced off half the county, and he still remembered the layout of the land. The old logging roads that wound up toward the ridge. The places where the tree line broke enough to see down into the valley where the buildings sat. "Careful up there," he told Cooper. folding his arms across his chest like the memory of it made him cold. Something about that place always felt wrong to me. Quiet in a way that ain't natural. Like everybody's watching everybody else, all the time. Every night, the brothers gathered back at the clubhouse and laid out what they'd found, piece by piece, like putting together a puzzle with half the picture missing. Marcus listened to all of it, filing it away, feeling the shape of something taking form even if he couldn't see the whole of it yet. It was Wheeler who found the thread that mattered. He'd stopped at a small gas station on the county road that ran closest to the ridge, one of those places with 2 pumps and a single register, run by an older woman named Peggy, who'd worked there longer than anybody could remember. Wheeler bought a soda he didn't want and let the conversation wander, the way Marcus had taught them all to do, patient and unhurried. "You get folks from up the ridge in here much?" Wheeler asked, leaning against the counter. Peggy's face did something complicated, somewhere between caution and curiosity. Time to time. Not often. They come down for gas, maybe some canned goods, then they're gone again. Ever see a young woman? Brown hair, kind of quiet-looking? Peggy went still for a moment, her eyes narrowing like she was pulling the memory up from somewhere deep. "Matter of fact," she said slowly, "there was a girl came in here a few weeks back. Bought formula. Some diapers, canned milk, had a young fellow with her the whole time, never left her side. Had a rifle slung over his shoulder, plain as day, right here in my store. Didn't say much, that girl. Looked tired. Looked scared, if I'm being honest with you." Wheeler kept his voice even, though his heart had started to pound. "You remember what she looked like?" "Exactly?" Peggy nodded slow. "I remember. Girl like that. You don't forget." Marcus found Sheriff Hutchins at his desk the next morning, a cup of cold coffee sitting untouched by his elbow, papers stacked in neat piles that told Marcus the man had been up half the night working through something. Hutchins looked up when Marcus knocked on the doorframe, and something in his face told Marcus he already knew this visit was coming. Wheeler talked to a gas station owner, Marcus said, not bothering with pleasantries. He sat down heavy in the chair across from the desk, the wood groaning under his weight. Woman named Peggy. She saw Callie a few weeks back. Description matches. Girl was buying formula, diapers, canned milk. Had a man with her the whole time, rifle over his shoulder, never left her side. Hutchins leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He was a big man, solid through the shoulders, with gray creeping into his hair that hadn't been there a few years back. 20-some years wearing the badge had given him a look most folks trusted on sight. But right now that look was tired. Worn thin. "That's good work," Hutchins said slowly. "Real good work. But Marcus, you know as well as I do, it ain't enough. It's her, Dale, it's Callie. Maybe it is. Probably it is. But a description from a gas station clerk ain't a warrant. It ain't evidence of a crime. I got no probable cause to go knocking on that compound's gate, let alone tearing the place apart looking for a woman who, far as the law's concerned, ain't been reported missing by anybody with legal standing." Hutchins tapped his pen against the desk, frustration bleeding into his voice now. "Ruth never filed anything. Not back when Callie first left. Not since. There's no paper trail saying anybody's being held against their will up there." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The girl was tethered to a stake in a field, Dale, in the middle of a storm. "You call that nothing?" "I call that a crime against a child, and believe me, I want answers for that same as you do." But the compound's got lawyers. Good ones, from what I hear. They so much as smell an unlawful search, they'll bury us in paperwork before we get within 100 yards of that fence line. And if we go in heavy-handed, and it turns out there's nothing there we can charge anybody with, we've tipped our hand for nothing. Whoever's in charge up there just digs in deeper. Maybe moves Callie somewhere, we'll never find her. Hutchins shook his head, and Marcus could see the weight of it sitting on him, the kind of weight that came from wanting to do right and knowing the law wouldn't let you. My hands are tied, Marcus. I wish to God they weren't. But they are. The room went quiet for a moment, just the hum of the old ceiling fan turning slow overhead. Marcus stared at the stack of papers on the desk, thinking of Ruth back at the kitchen table, asking her same quiet question every morning, thinking of Hope banging her wooden spoons on the floor, too young to know how close she'd come to never having a family to come home to at all. There's another way, Marcus said finally. Hutchins raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Welfare check. Nothing official, nothing that gives their lawyers something to grab onto. You, me, and Ruth. We go up to the perimeter, ask to see the residents, make sure everybody's accounted for and safe. It's not a raid. It's not a search. It's just people checking in. You've got the authority to do that much, don't you? Hutchins was quiet a long moment, turning the pen over in his fingers. That's thin ice, Marcus. Compound like that. They see a sheriff's cruiser coming up that road. They're liable to close ranks before we even get out of the car. That's why it needs to be careful. Slow, no lights, no sirens, just Ruth wanting to see if her family's all right. Ain't nobody can argue with a mother wanting that. Hutchins studied him, and something in his weathered face softened, the frustration giving way to something like resolve. All right, he said finally. We do this careful, my way, my rules. We go up there quiet, we ask polite, and if anything about it feels wrong, we back off and regroup. I ain't putting Ruth or that little girl's mother in danger chasing a feeling. Understood, Marcus said. When do you want to go? Soon as Ruth's ready, Marcus said. She's waited long enough already. Ruth's kitchen smelled like onions and garlic by the time the sun dropped low behind the trees outside her window. Marcus stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up over his thick forearms, chopping carrots with more care than a man his size looked like he should be capable of. Ruth stirred a pot of soup on the stove, glancing over at him every so often like she still couldn't quite believe he was standing there. Hope sat on the floor near the table, banging 2 wooden spoons together, babbling nonsense words that made no sense to anybody but her. Every few minutes she'd stop, look up at the 2 grown-ups in the kitchen, and grin like she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. You always were better in a kitchen than you let on, Ruth said, testing the soup with a spoon. I remember you used to bring me biscuits. Terrible biscuits. Hard as rocks. Marcus almost smiled. Wasn't trying to feed you. Was trying to get you to notice me. Oh. I noticed you. Ruth laughed, soft and easy. A sound that seemed to loosen something tight in her chest. Whole town noticed you, Marcus Doyle. Boy on that loud motorcycle, hair too long, always looking like trouble was following him around. Trouble mostly was following me around. Mostly, she smiled down at the pot, stirring slow. But not always. They worked quiet for a while after that, the only sounds the knife against the cutting board and Hope's spoons clattering on the linoleum. It was a comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. Marcus set the carrots aside and started on the celery, and Ruth watched him out of the corner of her eye, something wistful passing over her face. "I used to wonder what happened to you," she said finally. "After you left. I'd hear things, now and then. Somebody'd say they saw you on that bike of yours, riding through on your way to somewhere else, never staying long enough for anybody to talk to you." "Wasn't much reason to stay," Marcus said. His voice had gone quieter, rougher around the edges. "Not after everything." Ruth set her spoon down and turned to face him fully. "I heard about your girl, Marcus, a long time after it happened. I'm sorry I never came to you then. I should have." Marcus's hands went still on the cutting board. He didn't look up right away. "Wasn't anything you could have done?" "Wasn't anything anybody could have done." "That doesn't mean you should have carried it alone." He didn't answer that, just picked the knife back up and finished the celery, the silence stretching out between them, heavy but not unkind. Ruth turned back to the stove, but her hand found his arm for just a moment, resting there light as a bird landing on a branch, and then she let it go. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said, so quiet he almost missed it over the bubbling soup. "All these years. I'd see a motorcycle go by and my heart would jump just for a second, thinking maybe. Foolish, I know. But there it is." Marcus set the knife down. Looked at her. Really looked, the way he hadn't let himself look at anybody in years. "Wasn't foolish," he said. "I thought about you too. More than I ever let myself admit. Told myself it wasn't fair to you, dragging my grief into your life. Told myself you deserved better than a man who couldn't put himself back together." "Marcus, I should have come back," he said, the words coming slow, like they cost him something to say out loud. "Should have found you. Instead, I just kept riding, kept telling myself there was nothing left worth stopping for. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie every time I thought of you." Ruth's eyes were shining now, but she didn't look away from him. "We were both fools then. Reckon we were." A sudden burst of laughter cut through the quiet, high and bright and full of joy. Hope had gotten hold of a plastic bowl from the low cabinet and was banging it against the floor now, delighted with the racket she was making, her whole small body shaking with giggles at her own mischief. Both Ruth and Marcus turned to look at her, and whatever heaviness had settled over the kitchen broke apart like sunlight through clouds. The morning air was cool and smelled of pine when Marcus pulled the truck off the main road onto a rutted dirt path that wound back through the trees. Sheriff Hutchins followed close behind in his cruiser, gravel popping under his tires. Ruth sat in the passenger seat beside Marcus, her hands folded so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. "You all right?" Marcus asked, glancing over at her. "No," Ruth said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." The path opened up into a clearing, and there it was. A weathered wooden fence, gray and splintered with age, ran along the edge of a wide stretch of land. Behind it, Marcus could make out the shapes of buildings, low and simple, smoke curling up from a chimney somewhere in the back. It didn't look like much. It looked like a place people had built with their own hands, out of necessity, more than choice. Marcus parked near the fence line and cut the engine. Hutchins pulled up behind him and got out slow, his hand resting near his belt, not on his weapon, just close enough to remind anybody watching that he was still the law even out here. They didn't have to wait long. Two young men came out from behind one of the buildings, rifles slung over their shoulders, walking with the kind of wary stiffness that came from being taught to distrust strangers before they'd ever had the chance to learn different. They stopped a good 20 feet back from the fence, eyeing the three of them like they were something dangerous that had wandered too close. "This is private property," the taller one said. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a thin beard that hadn't quite come in all the way, and eyes that darted between Marcus's leather vest and Hutchins's uniform like he couldn't decide which one worried him more. "We know," Hutchins said, keeping his voice even and calm. "We're not here to cause trouble. We need to speak to somebody inside. Name's Callie Bennett. Tell whoever's in charge that Ruth Bennett is here to see her daughter." The two young men exchanged a look. Something passed between them, quick and unspoken, and the shorter one turned and jogged back toward the buildings without a word, disappearing behind a wall of pine trees that blocked the view of whatever lay beyond. The taller one stayed, rifle still slung over his shoulder, watching them with the same careful suspicion. Nobody spoke. The wind moved through the trees, and somewhere far off a dog barked twice and went quiet. Ruth stood very still beside Marcus, her eyes fixed on the spot where the young man had disappeared, like if she looked hard enough she might catch a glimpse of something. Anybody. Moving behind those trees. Marcus stepped a little closer to her, not touching her, just close enough that she'd know he was there. "They'll bring her," he said quietly. "Give it time." "I've given it years," Ruth said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together tight, like she was trying to hold something back that had been building up inside her for far too long. Minutes passed. It felt longer. Hutchins shifted his weight from foot to foot, arms crossed, watching the tree line with the patient stillness of a man used to waiting on things that mattered. Marcus kept his eyes moving, taking in the fence, the buildings, the shapes of a few more figures now gathering in the distance, watching them the way you'd watch a storm cloud rolling in. Finally, the shorter young man came jogging back through the trees, breathing hard. He said something low to the taller one, and the taller one turned back to face them. "She's coming," he said. "Says to wait by the fence. Just her. Nobody else." Ruth's breath caught. Her hand found Marcus's arm and gripped it, tight enough that he could feel her trembling straight through his jacket sleeve. "Marcus," she whispered, and her voice was barely more than air. "That's my girl. That's my Callie." Her hands were shaking so bad now she had to press them together again, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the tree line, where any second now, after all these years of silence and searching and hoping against hope, her daughter was finally going to walk out and be real again. A figure came through the trees. She walked slow, like she wasn't sure her legs would carry her the whole way, and Marcus felt Ruth go rigid beside him. The woman was thin, thinner than she should have been, her collarbones sharp beneath a faded gray shirt that hung loose on her frame. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her skin had the pale, tired look of someone who didn't get outside much, or eat enough when she did. But her eyes. Marcus saw it the second she got close enough. Ruth's eyes, looking back out of a face that had aged 20 years in the last 5. "Callie," Ruth said, and the name broke apart in her mouth. Callie stopped a few feet from the fence. Her hands came up to her mouth, and for a second, she just stood there, staring, like she didn't trust what she was seeing. Like maybe this was a dream she'd had before and woken up from disappointed too many times to believe it now. "Mom?" Her voice was small, cracked clean down the middle. "Mom, is that really you?" "It's me, baby, it's me." Ruth was already moving, closing the distance, her hands out in front of her before she even reached the fence. "I'm here. I'm right here." Callie closed the last few feet at a run, stumbling over a root, catching herself, and then her hands were through the gaps in the wooden slats, grabbing hold of her mother's fingers like she was afraid they'd vanish if she let go. Ruth pressed her palms flat against her daughter's, fingers laced through the old gray wood, and both women were crying now. Ugly, ragged sobs that neither of them tried to hide. "I looked for you," Ruth said, her voice breaking on every other word. "Every single day. I never stopped looking. I never gave up on you, you hear me? Not once." "I know," Callie whispered. "I know, Mama. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't you dare apologize to me." Ruth reached one hand up through the fence and touched her daughter's face, cupping her thin cheek like she was checking to make sure she was real. "None of this was your fault. None of it." Marcus stood back a few steps, giving them room, but he watched Callie's eyes flick past her mother, quick and nervous, toward the tree line behind her. Checking, making sure nobody was close enough to hear. "Hope," Callie said suddenly, her whole body going tight. Is my baby? Please tell me she's okay, please. I've been going out of my mind. I didn't know if she was. If somebody had." "She's safe," Marcus said, stepping forward. "She's with your mother. She's healthy. She's happy." Something in Callie seemed to collapse and rebuild itself all at once. She pressed her forehead against the fence, right between the slats, and let out a sound that was half sob and half laugh, wild with relief. "Thank God," she said. "Thank God, thank God." Ruth reached up and smoothed her daughter's hair back from her face, the way she must have done 1,000 times when Callie was small. "Baby, listen to me. We can get you out of here. Today, right now if you want it. You don't have to stay in this place one more day." Callie's face changed. The relief was still there, but something else moved in underneath it. Something careful and scared. She glanced back at the trees again before she spoke, her voice dropping low. "I've been planning it," she said. "For months now. Ever since I got the chance to send Hope, to get her out. I couldn't take her with me all at once. It was too risky. Somebody would have seen. So I did it in pieces. I've been saving things, hiding them. A little money, some clothes. I know which nights the watch is thin by the east fence." Ruth's hands tightened around hers. "Then let us help you finish it." "I'm scared," Callie admitted, and the words seemed to cost her something to say out loud. "I'm so scared, Mom. But I'm ready. I've been ready. I just need a few days. I can't just walk out right now. They'll know something's wrong. They'll watch me closer. I need time to gather what's mine without anybody noticing." "Take the time you need," Ruth said. "But you're not doing this alone anymore. Not ever again." 2 days later, the sky hung gray and low over the tree line, the kind of morning that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Marcus stood beside his bike at the edge of the dirt turnout, arms crossed, watching Ruth pace a small worn path in the grass. She'd barely slept, he could tell. The lines under her eyes had gotten deeper, and her hands hadn't stopped moving since they'd climbed out of Hutchins's truck. "She'll be there," Marcus said. "She said 2 days. It's been 2 days. I know." Ruth pressed her palms together like she was praying, or trying to keep herself from shaking apart. "I just keep thinking about everything that could go wrong." Hutchins came around from the other side of the truck, adjusting his belt, his eyes scanning the tree line out of old habit. He wasn't wearing his uniform today, just a plain jacket and jeans, trying not to spook anybody watching from the compound. But Marcus knew the man well enough to see the badge was never far from his mind, even tucked away in his pocket. "Let's keep this quiet," Hutchins said. "No sudden moves. We get her out, we get her in the truck, and we go. Simple as that." They walked the same path as before, through the trees, the ground still soft from days of rain, until the wooden fence came into view. And there she was. Callie stood close to the fence line, a small canvas bag clutched against her chest like it held everything she owned in the world. Maybe it did. Her eyes found them the second they stepped out of the trees, and something in her face cracked open with relief. "You came," she whispered, hurrying forward. "I don't know what I thought. I've been standing here for 20 minutes trying to talk myself into believing it was really happening." "It's happening," Ruth said, reaching through the fence to take her daughter's hand. "Come on, baby. Let's get you home." Callie nodded, fast, like she was afraid if she slowed down she'd lose her nerve. She swung one leg over the low part of the fence where a board had come loose, steadying herself with a hand on the splintered wood. Marcus stepped forward to help her, his hand out. "Easy now," he said. "Almost there." She was halfway through, one leg on each side of the fence, when a voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "That's far enough." Everybody froze. Callie's whole body went stiff, caught straddling the fence, her face draining of color so fast Marcus thought she might faint right there. Ruth's hand tightened around her daughter's wrist. A man stepped out from the tree line on the compound side, moving slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world and knew it. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in the same plain gray clothes as the others Marcus had seen, but there was something different about the way he carried himself. Something that said the others answered to him. His beard was long, his hair pulled back, and his eyes swept over the group at the fence with a cold, careful calm. This was the one they called the shepherd. Marcus had heard the name whispered by folks in town, always with a kind of nervous respect, like speaking it too loud might summon him. "Callie," the man said, his voice even, controlled, "get back on this side of the fence." "Daniel." "Please," Callie said, and the name landed on Marcus like a stone dropped into still water. "Please, just let me go. Let me take her and go." Ruth made a sound Marcus had never heard a person make before, something torn straight out of her chest. Her face had gone the color of old paper, her hand flying up to cover her mouth, her eyes locked on the man standing in front of them like she was looking at a ghost. "Daniel?" she whispered, the word barely making it past her lips. "Danny?" The man's eyes shifted, found Ruth's face, and for just a moment, something flickered behind the cold control. Something raw and old and wounded. Then it was gone, folded back away, hidden behind the same hard mask he'd worn stepping out of the trees. "Hello, Mother," he said. Ruth's legs nearly gave out. Marcus moved closer to her without thinking, his hand hovering near her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell. "It can't be," Ruth said. "You can't be him." "My Danny had. He had soft eyes. He used to draw pictures of birds and leave them on my pillow." "That boy is gone," Daniel said. "He left a long time ago." "You made sure of that." "I never left you," Ruth said, her voice cracking. "I looked for you. Every single day I looked. You looked for Callie." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I heard you say her name in town once, years ago." "Never mind. Not once. That's not true." isn't it? He took a step closer to the fence, and Hutchins shifted his weight, hand drifting toward his belt out of old instinct even though he wasn't wearing his badge. Marcus caught the movement and gave a small shake of his head. Not yet. Callie was still frozen on the fence, one leg on each side, her bag clutched to her chest. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Don't do this. Not now. Stay where you are," Daniel said, and his voice had an edge now, something sharp underneath the calm. "You don't get to just walk away. Not after everything I've built here, everything I did to keep this family together." "Together?" Ruth's voice rose, shaking loose from her grief and turning into something fiercer. "You call this together? Keeping your sister locked behind a fence? Tying a rope around a baby's waist and staking her out in a storm?" Something shifted in Daniel's face. The mask cracked wider this time, and Marcus saw real pain underneath it, raw and old, like a wound that had never closed right. "You think I wanted that?" Daniel said, and his voice broke on the last word. "You think I wanted hope out there in the rain? Then why?" Ruth's hands were shaking. "Why would you do that to her? To your own family?" Daniel looked away, out toward the trees, like he couldn't stand to hold his mother's eyes anymore. His shoulders dropped, just slightly, the hard shell of him softening for the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows. "Because I knew you'd come," he said quietly. "I knew if she was found that way, somebody would recognize it. I knew it would reach you." Ruth's brow furrowed. "Recognize what?" Daniel finally looked at her again, and his eyes were wet now, glassy in the gray morning light. "The knot," he said, "the one on the rope. You taught me that knot when I was 7 years old. Sitting on the back porch, remember? You were teaching me how to tie my shoes, and I couldn't get it right, so you showed me a different way. Said it was a trick your father taught you. You said nobody else tied it that way. Said it was ours." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth again, and this time a sound escaped her. Something between a sob and a gasp. "I remembered it," Daniel went on, his voice cracking apart now, all the careful control gone. "All these years, I remembered it. And when I needed you to come, when I needed you to finally see us, to see me, I used it. I tied it around her waist myself. I knew somebody would find her, and I knew whoever untangled that knot would go looking for who taught it to them, and that would lead them straight to you." "Danny," Ruth whispered, tears streaming freely now. "You put that baby out in a storm. You could have called me, written me a letter. Anything. I didn't think you'd come for me," Daniel said, his voice breaking completely now, the shepherd mask gone entirely, replaced by a boy who had waited 15 years to be found. "I thought maybe you'd come for her. For hope. But not for me. Never for me." The wind picked up through the trees, rustling the leaves, and for a long moment nobody said anything at all. Ruth stood at the fence, staring at her son, at the broken, desperate man standing where her boy used to be, and something in her chest tore open wide enough to swallow every year they'd lost. Ruth pressed both hands against the fence wire, like she could reach through it and hold him the way she used to when he was small. "Danny, look at me," she said. "I would have come for you. Just for you. You didn't need to put a rope on that baby. You didn't need to scare her half to death in a thunderstorm. She's 2 years old, Danny. She doesn't understand any of this. She just knows she was cold and wet and alone." "She wasn't alone long," Daniel said. But the words came out smaller now, less sure of themselves. "I made sure somebody would find her fast. I picked that field because I knew the roads got watched. I knew somebody would come. You gambled with her life. Ruth's voice cracked down the middle. That's what you did. You gambled with a baby's life because you wanted my attention. Do you hear yourself? Daniel flinched like she'd struck him. For a second, something young and wounded passed behind his eyes. The boy who used to leave bird drawings on her pillow. Then his jaw hardened again, and the mask started sliding back into place, brick by brick. You don't get to stand there and judge me, he said. You weren't here. You don't know what I built, what it took to keep us safe, to keep us fed, to keep this family from falling apart the way it did after Dad left. Your father leaving wasn't my fault, Ruth said. And it wasn't a reason to disappear into these woods and turn yourself into somebody I don't recognize. Callie still hadn't moved from the fence. One leg braced on each side. The diaper bag hugged so tight to her chest, her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes darted between her mother and her brother, back and forth, like she was watching a rope being pulled taut between two people she loved, waiting to see which side would snap first. Daniel, she said carefully. Nobody's judging what you built, but you can't keep doing this. You can't keep making choices for me. For Hope. I'm leaving. I already told you that. You're not leaving. Daniel's voice sharpened, the softness gone as fast as it had come. Not like this. Not with them. He jerked his chin toward Marcus, toward Hutchins standing quiet and still by the truck. You think they care about us? About what we've built out here? They're strangers, Callie. That old woman is the only blood we've got, and even she looked for you and not me. That's not true, Ruth said again, desperate now, her hands gripping the fence wire hard enough to whiten her knuckles too. Danny, please, I am asking you, I am begging you, let her go. Let her take Hope home. You can come too. We can figure the rest out together, all of us. But not like this. Not with a fence between us. For one long moment, something flickered in Daniel's face. Marcus saw it, the way a man watches weather change on the horizon, some small crack of surrender trying to break through the hard shell he'd built around himself for 15 years. Ruth saw it too. She leaned forward, hope rising in her chest like a held breath finally about to be let go. Then Daniel's eyes went cold again. No, he said. Nobody's taking her anywhere. Not today, not like this, with cops standing in my yard and some biker filming everything for evidence. He hadn't seen a camera, but the accusation came out anyway, wild and grasping. This is my land, my people. You want to talk? You talk to me alone. Callie stays. The baby stays with her. That's the only offer I'm making. Daniel, Ruth's voice broke on his name. I mean it. He backed up a step, and behind him, in the tree line, shapes shifted. Other figures who had been standing quiet in the shadows now drawing closer, drawn by the rising volume of his voice. You want a family reunion, Mom, you can have it. But it happens on my terms. Or it doesn't happen at all. I'll shut this whole thing down right now if I have to. I've done it before. Callie's breath caught, her eyes wide with fear, still frozen on the fence, still unsure which way to fall. Hutchins's hand moved toward the radio at his shoulder, slow and steady, the way a man reaches for something he hopes he won't need. The shapes in the tree line had multiplied. 4 now, maybe 5, standing with their arms crossed, watching their leader the way dogs watch a storm. Dale, Marcus said quietly. Not yet. Hutchins froze, his hand still hovering near the radio. He looked at Marcus, uncertain, but something in the older man's steady voice made him wait. Marcus stepped forward. He moved slow, no sudden motions, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. His leather vest creaked. The patches on it, the skull, the wings, the years of hard road stitched into every inch of it, seemed to mean something different out here than they did on a highway. Out here, they just made him look like exactly what he was. A man who'd seen things. "Daniel," Marcus said, "you don't know me. That's fine. I'm not here to arrest you, and I'm not here to take anything from you that ain't already walked away on its own 2 feet." Daniel's eyes narrowed, wary, but he didn't tell Marcus to stop. "I know how this looks," Marcus went on. "Cops, strangers, a woman crying at your fence. Feels like the whole world showed up to take something from you. I know that feeling. Felt it myself once." "You don't know anything about me," Daniel said, but the words came out thinner now, less like a wall and more like a question. "Maybe not," Marcus said. "But I know about losing people, and I know about the kind of stupid, desperate things a man does when he thinks losing them is his fault." Something in Daniel's shoulders shifted, just slightly. Ruth, still gripping the fence, went very still, watching Marcus the way she might watch someone walk across thin ice. "I had a daughter," Marcus said. His voice didn't shake, but it dropped lower, rougher, like the words cost him something to pull up from wherever he'd buried them. "Little girl. 6 years old. Quick laugh. Used to ride on the back of my bike in the driveway, just in circles, 10 miles an hour, both of us grinning like fools. I was supposed to be watching her by the pool at my brother's place. Just for a minute, I turned my back to grab a beer out of the cooler. He stopped. The wind moved through the trees behind Daniel, rustling the leaves, but nobody said a word. That's all it took, Marcus said. 1 minute. When I turned around, she was already under. I got her out. Did everything right, everything they teach you. Didn't matter. She was gone before the ambulance made it halfway up the drive. Daniel's jaw, which had been set hard as stone since they arrived, twitched. His eyes, cold a moment ago, flickered with something else now. Something that looked almost like recognition. For 15 years, Marcus said, I told myself if I'd just been a better man, a more careful man, she'd still be here. I built a whole life out of that guilt. Rode 1,000 miles a month, just so I wouldn't have to sit still with it. Wouldn't have to feel how much I hated myself. Why are you telling me this? Daniel said, but there was no bite left in it. Just a raw, quiet question. Because I see it in you, Marcus said. That same rope, not the one you tied around that baby, the one you tied around your own chest the day your mama's world fell apart and you decided it was on you to hold everybody together. You've been carrying that so long, you don't even remember what it felt like before. And now you're out here in these woods, calling it protecting your family, when really, it's just guilt wearing a different coat. Daniel's mouth opened like he meant to argue, to throw the wall back up the way he'd done a dozen times already. But nothing came out. His eyes, hard as flint moments ago, glistened now, wet at the corners, and for the first time since they'd arrived at that fence, the mask he wore didn't quite fit his face anymore. The rifle in Daniel's hands had been steady the whole time, held at an angle that wasn't quite pointed at anyone, but wasn't lowered either, a warning more than a threat. Now it dipped, just an inch. Then, another. His arms, corded with muscle from years of chopping wood and hauling water and doing everything a man does when he's trying to prove he doesn't need anybody, seemed to lose their strength all at once. He let the rifle fall to his side, barrel pointing at the dirt. "I never wanted to hurt her," Daniel said. His voice cracked on the word her, and it wasn't clear if he meant Hope or Callie or maybe even Ruth, standing there at the fence with her hands white-knuckled around the wire. "I never wanted to hurt anybody. That's not. That was never." He stopped, rubbed a hand across his face, hard, like he was trying to wipe something off that wouldn't come clean. "The rope," he said. "That knot. You know what that is?" Ruth's breath caught. "The one your grandfather taught you," she whispered. "The one you used to tie around your wrist so you wouldn't lose your mittens." Daniel nodded, and his face crumpled, just for a second, before he forced it still again. "You remember that?" "Of course I remember that," Ruth said. "I didn't think you would," Daniel said. "I didn't think you remembered anything about me anymore. Not after." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The years hung there between them, thick and heavy, all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that had passed without a single word. "I put that knot on her," Daniel said, nodding toward the direction of the road, toward the hospital miles away where Hope had been warm and dry and safe for days now. "I put it there because I knew. I knew if anybody ever found her, if anybody ever untied that rope, they'd know. They'd know it was me. It was the only way I could think of to say—" His voice broke entirely now, and he had to stop, had to breathe, his chest rising and falling like he'd been running for miles instead of standing still. "To say what?" Marcus asked gently. "To say, come find us," Daniel said. "Come find me." I didn't know how else to make her look. I didn't know how else to make anybody look. After all this time, I built this whole place so I wouldn't need anybody to look, and then I realized I couldn't stand it, not looking, not being looked for, and I didn't know what else to do. So I did something crazy. Something stupid and crazy, and I put that baby out there in a storm and told myself it was fine, told myself somebody would find her fast, told myself it would just bring her back to me. He looked at Ruth then, really looked at her, his eyes red and raw and ashamed. I wasn't trying to isolate us more. God, that was never the plan. I just wanted you to come. I wanted somebody to come. The wind moved through the trees again, but this time it felt different, softer somehow, like even the forest was holding its breath. Ruth let go of the fence. She stepped forward, past Hutchins, past Marcus, her small frame moving with a steadiness that surprised everyone watching, including herself. The wire fence stood between her and her son, but she reached her hand through it anyway, through the gap where the wire had rusted thin, palm open, fingers trembling. "Daniel," she said, "look at me." He did. Slowly, like it cost him everything he had left. "I never stopped loving you," Ruth said. "Not for one single day. Not when you left. Not when you stopped writing. Not when I didn't know if you were alive or dead out here in these woods. I looked for you every day, baby. Every single day." Daniel's shoulders shook. He didn't move toward her. Not yet. But he didn't pull away either. "It is not too late," Ruth said, her voice steady even as tears ran freely down her cheeks. "It is not too late to leave this place, to come home. Not to my house, not just to walls and a roof, but to a family, Daniel, a real one. Broken in places, maybe, but real. And it is waiting for you. I am waiting for you." Her hand stayed there, reaching through the fence, open and empty, and offered without condition, the way only a mother's hand can be. Daniel stood there for a long moment, his hand still resting on the rifle at his side, his mother's fingers waiting in the between them. The silence stretched out, broken only by the wind moving through the pines and the distant creak of a door somewhere in the compound, someone watching from a window, afraid to come closer. Then he set the rifle down. He laid it on the ground, gently, like it was something precious instead of something dangerous, and stepped forward until his hand met his mother's through the gap in the fence. Her fingers closed around his, small and thin but strong, and he made a sound low in his throat, something between a sob and a sigh. Like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Mama." Ruth pulled him closer, and the fence rattled between them, wire biting into her palm, but she didn't let go. "That's my boy," she whispered. "That's my boy." Behind Daniel, figures had gathered near the cabins, a dozen or more, men and women in worn flannel and boots caked with mud, watching with the wary stillness of people who didn't know what came next. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A woman near the fire pit held a baby on her hip, and even the baby seemed to sense the weight of the moment, staying quiet, eyes wide. Daniel turned to them. His voice, when he found it, was rougher than before, but steadier too. "I'm leaving," he said. "Anybody who wants to come with me, you can. Anybody who wants to stay, that's your choice too. I'm not going to make anybody do anything anymore." Nobody answered right away. A few of them looked at each other. An older man near the woodpile shook his head slowly, not in anger, just in the way a man shakes his head when something he built is coming apart in his hands, but nobody tried to stop him. Marcus watched Daniel walk back toward the cabins, watched him disappear inside the largest one, the one with smoke still curling from its chimney pipe. He came out a few minutes later, with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Not much in it from the look of things. A few clothes. Something wrapped in cloth that might have been a photograph. A man didn't need much when he was finally walking toward something instead of hiding from it. Callie appeared beside her mother, her arms wrapped tight around herself, watching her brother with an expression that held both relief and something raw. Something that looked like old grief finally being allowed to surface. When Daniel reached the fence, he stopped in front of her. "Callie," he said. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, quick and fierce, the way you hug someone when you're not sure you'll ever get the chance again. "You scared me," she said into his shoulder. "You scared me so bad, Daniel." "I know," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." Hutchins moved through the gate then, calm and businesslike, murmuring something to Daniel about how things would go from here, about talking to the county, about doing this the right way. Daniel nodded along, his eyes distant but not resistant. A man accepting the shape of consequences he'd been running from for years. They walked together toward the trucks parked at the edge of the tree line, the compound falling away behind them, its wooden fences and smoke and silent watchers growing smaller with every step. Marcus fell into step beside Ruth, his hand hovering near her back without quite touching her, a silent offer of support she leaned into without needing to ask. Callie climbed into the back seat first, reaching into her jacket pocket to pull out a small folded photograph of Hope, the one she'd kept hidden all these months, dog-eared and soft from handling. She held it against her chest with both hands, like she could feel her daughter through the paper if she pressed hard enough. Daniel got in beside her, quiet, his eyes already fixed out the window at the trees sliding past, at the compound shrinking in the side mirror until it was nothing but a smudge of gray against the darkening sky. Ruth settled into the front seat, but before Marcus pulled onto the road, she reached back between the seats and found her son's hand again, squeezing it once, firm and sure, a promise made without words. Daniel squeezed back. The truck pulled forward, dust rising behind them, and the compound disappeared into the dusk as they drove toward home. The days that followed moved like the slow turning of a heavy wheel. Daniel stayed at Ruth's small house, sleeping in the spare room with the blue curtains that used to belong to his sister's bedroom. He didn't say much about it, but Ruth noticed how he ran his fingers along the windowsill each morning, like he was learning the shape of something he'd forgotten. Sheriff Hutchins came by on the third day. He parked his cruiser in the gravel driveway and sat on the porch with Ruth for a few minutes before he even brought up the reason for his visit. That was the kind of man Hutchins was. He knew how to let a person get their footing before he asked them to walk. "He's ready to talk," Ruth said, smoothing her hands over her knees. It wasn't a question. Hutchins nodded. "I think he is. He's got a lot to account for, Ruth. The compound, the people who lived there, the things that went on. But I meant what I said. His cooperation matters. The way he let things go without a fight. And his intent regarding hope." He paused, choosing his words like he was picking stones out of a path. "I've seen a lot of men who meant harm. Daniel didn't mean harm. He meant to be seen." Ruth looked toward the window where Daniel stood in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug, his shoulders still heavy but not as hunched as they'd been. "He needs to hear that. Straight from you." So they went inside. Daniel turned, drying his hands on a dish towel, and the morning light caught the lines under his eyes. Ruth saw in that moment how tired he looked. Tired in the way that comes from years of carrying things alone. Hutchins sat at the kitchen table, and Ruth sat across from him, leaving the chair at the end empty for Daniel. He took it after a long pause, setting the towel down with the careful kind of motion a man makes when he's trying not to break anything else. "Daniel," Hutchins began, "I'm not here to speak harshly. I'm here to put things on the table so we can figure out how you want to handle it." Daniel nodded. "Go on." "The county has questions about the compound, about stockpiles, about folks who might have come there unwillingly. There's a lot I don't need to tell us that I don't want to stumble upon. Some of it will have to face the law. That's not a choice. But the way you face it..." Hutchins leaned forward. "That's where you get to decide who you are from here on out." Daniel's hands rested on the table. They were calloused from work, from gripping tools and fences and fear for years. Looking them, he let out a breath that seemed to carry something with it. "I'll talk. I can't talk about everything. Some of it is other people's stories. But what's mine, I'll answer for it." Hutchins pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket. "There's going to be meetings. Paperwork, possibly a hearing down at the county courthouse, so the judge can understand the full picture. Your lawyer can be there, and you have every right to say nothing until we get into that room. But I tell you right now, son, the honest way is the only way I can help you through this. Will you work with me?" For a long moment, Daniel didn't answer. He looked at his mother. Ruth's eyes held him, quiet and steady. The same way. Did when he was brushing scraped knees, the same way she's waited every day, hoping he would find his way back. "I'll talk to you, Sheriff," Daniel said, and his voice cracked just a little when it thought his home. "I want everything on the table. All of it. I'm done living in the shadows I made for myself." Ruth reached across the table and took her son's hand. "You hear that, Daniel? That's sun coming through the clouds." Her smile quivered, but she held it together. "I'm so proud of you that I've always been proud." Daniel's breath caught. "Mama, I put a rope around a little girl. I don't deserve proud." Ruth squeezed his hand. "Deserving isn't the point. The point is you're choosing to do better. I stood by you, son. Every step." Webb, that last word, came from her lips, a word she taught him and Callie, and a word she said now with a meaning that ages into any dictionary. Daniel bowed his head over her answer. Hutchins stood, leaving the notebook on the table. "I'll be in touch tomorrow then, we'll start GOT. We'll get right." After he was gone, Daniel sat in the quiet kitchen and stared at his reflection in the dark window glass. Ruth moved behind him to a warm palm on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Daniel," she said. "Not ever again." He looked up at her, and for the first time in a long time, the weight of his shoulders seemed just a little lighter. He didn't have the words to tell her what that meant, so he just put his hand over hers and held on. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew there were forms and hearings and months of answering for things he'd rather forget. But for the first time in years, he knew what he was waking for. His mother's face, his sister's voice. A little girl named Hope, who had been the beginning of the end of his running. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of his real life. Daniel agreed to the terms. It didn't look like a victory. There was no fanfare or open arms waiting. But Hutchins put a steady hand on his shoulder on the way out the door. And Ruth put a contented, and that night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel slept through the night. Weeks passed, and Ruth's small house began to feel full in a way it hadn't in years. Callie and Hope had settled into the spare room down the hall, the one with the yellow wallpaper that Ruth had picked out decades ago and never got around to changing. Hope's toys had spread across the living room floor like little islands, blocks and stuffed rabbits, and a plastic truck missing one wheel. Ruth didn't mind stepping over them. She said it was the best kind of mess a house could have. Mornings had a rhythm now. Callie would wake early, before Hope stirred, and sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun climb over the fence line. Some days Ruth joined her, and they didn't talk much, just sat together in the quiet. Two women who had lost each other once, and were still learning how to be close again without rushing it. Other days Callie sat alone, thinking her own thoughts, and Ruth let her have that space too. She had learned over the years that healing didn't happen on anybody's schedule but the person doing the healing. Hope had started saying more words, up and more, and just last week, something that sounded almost like Gran, which made Ruth cry into the kitchen towel so hard that Callie had to laugh and hand her a fresh one. Daniel came by twice a week, always with Hutchins's blessing, and always for a set number of hours. The rules were clear. He wasn't to be alone with Hope without Callie or Ruth present. He wasn't to bring up the compound unless someone asked. He was to leave when the time was up. No arguments. Daniel followed every rule like a man walking a line he was afraid to fall off of. At first, Callie could barely look at him. She'd sit with her arms crossed while he talked with Ruth in the kitchen, her eyes tracking his every move like she still expected him to snap into the person he'd been at the compound. But Daniel didn't push. He didn't ask for forgiveness he hadn't earned. He just kept showing up, kept sitting at the table, kept answering Hutchins's questions the way he said he would, honestly, and in full. Slowly, something in Callie began to soften. It started small. She let him hold Hope's hand while they walked to the mailbox, Ruth trailing a few steps behind. Then, she let him read a picture book to Hope while she folded laundry in the next room, listening through the wall to his voice, low and careful, sounding out the words like he was relearning how to be gentle. "He's trying," Ruth said to Callie one evening, after Daniel had gone home to the small apartment he'd rented in town, the one Hutchins had helped him find. "I know," Callie said. "I just need time." "You take all the time you need," Ruth told her. "He'll still be here." And he was. Every visit, every week, steady as a heartbeat. Marcus had become part of the fabric of the house, too, though nobody had ever officially said so. He showed up most weekends, sometimes with a couple of his brothers from the club, sometimes alone on his bike, the engine announcing him from half a mile down the road. Hope had taken to shrieking with delight whenever she heard it, running to the window with her hands pressed against the glass. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus arrived to find the back fence leaning at a sorry angle, a section of it rotted through from years of rain and neglect. Daniel was already out there, sleeves rolled up, staring at the broken boards like he was trying to figure out where to start. "Looks like a job," Marcus said, walking up with a toolbox in hand. Daniel looked over, surprised. "You don't have to help. Didn't ask if I had to." Marcus set the toolbox down and pulled out a hammer. "Your mother deserves a fence that stands up." They worked without much talk after that. Daniel held boards steady while Marcus drove nails, the rhythm of the hammer falling into an easy, steady beat. The afternoon sun warmed their backs, and somewhere behind them, through the kitchen window, Ruth watched the two men working side by side, saying nothing, needing nothing but the quiet company of shared work. The sun poured down gold over Ruth's backyard, the kind of warm afternoon that made everything look softer around the edges. Motorcycles lined the gravel drive, chrome catching the light, and the smell of charcoal smoke drifted through the air, mixing with cut grass and something sweet baking in Ruth's kitchen. Marcus's brothers had shown up in force. Big Tom manned a cooler full of soda and lemonade, telling a story with his hands that made Callie throw her head back and laugh so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Whistler sat on the porch steps with a guitar he never quite finished tuning, plucking out something that sounded almost like a song. Cracker and Iron Mike argued cheerfully over whose turn it was to flip the burgers, both of them wearing aprons that said "Kiss the Cook" in faded letters, which Ruth had dug out from some drawer nobody remembered existed. Daniel stood at the grill, sleeves rolled to his elbows, spatula in hand. He wasn't laughing the way the others were. Not yet. But there was something loose in his shoulders that hadn't been there months ago. When Iron Mike clapped him on the back and said something about him being the best flipper of burgers this side of the county, Daniel actually smiled. A real one. Callie caught it from across the yard and didn't look away this time. Hope pedaled her little tricycle in wobbling circles across the grass, her chubby legs pumping hard, a paper crown from some birthday party weeks back still perched crooked on her head. She squealed every time she hit a bump, and every time Marcus was there, a few steps behind her, hands hovering but never grabbing, letting her wobble and catch herself, letting her learn. "You're gonna run over my foot one of these days," he told her. And she just laughed like that was the funniest thing in the world and pedaled faster. Ruth stood by the porch rail, a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand, watching all of it. The mended fence behind the flower bed. The full yard. Her daughter laughing. Her son at the grill instead of behind a wall somewhere she couldn't reach. The little girl who had once been tied to a stake in a storm, now steering a tricycle in the sunshine like she owned the whole world. She thought about the field that night. The rain. The knot in the rope that had broken her heart and mended it in the same breath. She thought about how strange it was. The way the worst thing that ever happened to her family had turned into the reason they were all standing here together now. As the afternoon wore on, the light began to change, turning from gold to a deep orange that stretched long shadows across the grass. The brothers packed up the grill, said their goodbyes with hugs that near about cracked ribs, and rode off one by one, engines fading down the road until it was quiet again, just crickets starting up in the tall grass at the edge of the yard. Hope's pedaling had slowed. She rubbed at her eyes with one fist, still gripping the handlebars with the other, and Marcus scooped her up off the tricycle without a word, settling her against his chest like he'd done it 1,000 times before. She tucked her head under his chin and was asleep before he'd taken 3 steps. Ruth walked over and stood beside him, watching the sun sink behind the tree line, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. Marcus had shed his vest hours ago, draped now over the back of a lawn chair, forgotten in the warmth of the day. He stood there in just his shirt, holding a sleeping child, looking nothing like the man who'd ridden through a thunderstorm all those months back. "You know," Ruth said softly, "I used to think broken things stayed broken. That once something snapped, you just learned to live around the crack." Marcus didn't answer, just looked down at Hope's small face pressed against his shoulder. "But I don't think that anymore," Ruth said. "Sometimes the most broken things, a rope, a family, a man's heart, they're exactly what lead us back to love." Marcus looked up at her then, and something passed between them, quiet and steady, the kind of understanding that didn't need more words. He shifted Hope gently in his arms, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt it settle into his bones. He was home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.